All right. The stream should be up and running smoothly here. So, tonight I had an individual reach out to me, and he wanted to have a discussion. I believe this brother is I believe his name is like Jason. Um, apparently he's like back from the Mind of Shrek days, right? So he's been like a long time viewer or whatever, but recently he changed his views on such and such subject. So he reached out to me the other day, and we decided to do a live show together. And yeah, so I'm gonna wait for him to click the link and come up. I sent him a private link. Let me see what's going on in the comments. Jared Genesis, how you doing, my friend? Rich, hey, how you doing, Rich? Hope you're doing well. Rich, are you gonna drop the link? Well, not right now because I have an individual I plan to bring on here first. That was our agreement, so I'll keep it with me and him for an hour, hour and a half, and then we'll see where the conversation goes from there. Oh, speaking of Ridge, while you're here, listening, man, you know what I found funny? The other day, Rock Upon Him like left a comment on one of my videos and was asking, "Hey, man, could you take down that playlist you have about me? Where you have like a couple videos on there, like exposing me or whatever. Could you take that down, man?" And I say, "Well, what's going on, man? Nobody's seen you around here for like what, 2 years? Like what are you up to? What's going on, man? Now, why have you stopped, your ministry and whatnot? Like, why have you, totally, cut that off? I mean, it just shows that you're not really a man of the Lord. It shows that you're not really a man of the Lord." And I gave him a verse, nearly paraphrasing it, but it says, if this ministry be of man, it'll come to naught. But if it be of God, it will flourish. Right? So his ministry, the SDA ministry he was running, it came to naught because he wasn't teaching what the Bible says. He was teaching a lie. He told me that, recently, man, I actually became a father now. I'm married and I have a child now, he was telling me. I was like, oh, okay, man. I understand, now you have stuff going on so that, but it doesn't give you an excuse to totally step away from doing any ministry work. You know what I'm saying? Which, again, not that he was teaching the truth anyway, but I'm just using him as an example that shows that he doesn't have the truth. He wasn't teaching the truth. He stepped away from it. And then, first of all, again, on one hand, when he told me he's married and has a child now, on one hand, I was happy for him. But then on the other hand, I felt bad for him as well. Now, on the one hand, it's like, oh, okay, cool. You got your own wife and a child now. Okay. But the other side of me was thinking, well, hold up a second, man. Well, that's not really a wise move to make today. That's not really a wise way to move yourself today. In the 21st century, it's just not wise to marry and have children today. Like, I'll give an example. Like, I was watching, I'm not necessarily say watching, I was just doing some scrolling on the Reddit app earlier, right? I was watching this one. I keep saying watching, but really scrolling. But then again, there are videos on there too. But anyway, I was scrolling on the Reddit app, and this guy put up a post like 9 hours ago, and he was saying, "Oh, girlfriend dropped me and took everything. She took everything." And he had a picture there. He just has like one, pillow, a blanket, and a mattress on the floor, and a chair in the corner, and games and shit. Now she took everything and left him with nothing. People would tell him, "Hey, well, that shows you that you don't, get married today and whatnot." All right, so my guest is here. I will bring him on here. Yo, Jason, can you hear me?
Yep. Uh, how you doing,
I'm
Nathan?
doing okay, Jason. How are you doing?
Great. I appreciate your show. I've been watching you the last couple weeks. Just I enjoy your rants. I'm gonna be honest. You're pretty funny.
All right, that's all good, my friend. That's good. But anyway, man, I don't know if I brought you up on my platform before in the past. I know you said you watched some of our content, but if you want to introduce yourself for the viewers watching and your belief system and whatnot, I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes if you want to introduce yourself for our listening audience.
Yep. So I'm all in for JB, formerly all in for Ya. So my beliefs have changed this last few weeks or so, or a few months or so. And so, anyways, I always reserve the right to be wrong. So I just want to say I'm not the ultimate authority. The ultimate authority is the Father above, and but I've just learned some things that I just want to bring to light, and you know, so yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So I saw your Gmail. You reached out to me and you wanted to discuss the subject. Matter of fact, let me pull it up here. I'll read it for the audience what you asked me. You said, "Hey Nathan, I have now realized and believe that Yahuwah, that the God of the Old Testament, is actually evil, and that Christ Barabbas is the true son of the Father." Then you asked me if what time we can do the live stream, but do you want to elaborate on your statement or what's
Yeah,
up? Okay.
exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. So I do believe, after studying, I've been studying both the Bible and Apocrypha for about a year and a half now, even though I was like Christian before. So, anyways, yeah, I do believe that I think Yahuwah might actually be evil, and um, that Jesus Barabbas came to save us from that. And anyways, you just look at the Old Testament and you can see all the death and destruction, all the killing that Yahuwah is doing, and just how angry he is. And yeah, I used to think that he was the true like father that we should be worship, like the father of the son Jesus. But I no longer believe that. So do you, I can just get started. So Isaiah 45:7 does say that it says forming light and creating darkness, making peace and creating evil. I Yahweh do all these. So it does say that he creates evil. Um, it does say that he does evil. Lamentations 3:38. It says, "Do not the evils and the good come out of the mouth of the Most High." Um, and then you look at Jeremiah 26:3, it says, "If so be that they listen and each turn from his evil way, then I shall repent of the evil that I plan to them because of the evil of their deeds." So, at the very least, it sounds like Yahuwah, yeah, he has, or he creates evil, and he even says that he does evil. And um if you look throughout the Old Testament, you see all the death and destruction. It's actually pretty horrifying if you actually sit down and read the Old Testament. Anyone that's actually done that, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's some horrifying things. Um, just as an example, like it's First Samuel 15:3. It talks about hold on, let me just pull it up. First Samuel 15:3. It's starting verse 2. "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." So, I mean, you just read that, and I don't, I mean, uh, Yahuwah is basically giving a command to kill every Amalekite, and that includes, it even says right there, every man and woman, infant and suckling, which, like, is, I think, most of us would agree that infants, you can argue, maybe men or women were doing evil and so they deserve to die, but infants are probably pretty innocent. And this isn't the only time infants are killed by Yahuwah. You look at the babies that died in the flood, or um, the there's probably people that died in or babies that died in Sodom and Gomorrah. Um, you look at 2 Samuel 12:15-18. This is when David had slept with Bathsheba. It says, Yahuwah smote the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, and he was sick. And on the seventh, you go further down to verse 18, it says, and on the seventh day it came to be that the child died. A lot of us will just make the excuse and say, you know, the baby, it was because of the transgression of David and David and Bathsheba. And I agree, like actions have consequences, but again, a baby, like the baby didn't do anything to deserve death.
Well,
Even
Jason, let me just chime in real quick. I don't mean to interrupt you, but just
yeah,
clarify this for me so I'm not mistaken. There's a belief out there that people have, as they say, that Christ is the real God of the Bible, but the Old Testament God is actually the devil. Just to clarify, are you saying that the God of the Old Testament is Satan when you call him an evil and false God? Can you clarify that?
yeah, that's basically what I believe. That's along the lines of what I believe.
Okay. So just to clarify again for the audience, so the God that we read about in the Old Testament, say for instance that talked to the prophets and delivered Israel out of the Egyptian captivity, you'd say that was actually Satan, right?
Yeah, and that Moses was kind of doing the work of Satan.
The work of Satan. Well, how about like say for instance, like if you read Exodus the 20th chapter, right, where Moses was on Mount Sinai and God gave him the tablets of stone and guidelines for the people to live by. What would you
Yeah.
say is like so evil about those commandments that Satan gave them down to a man to follow? Because when I read them, they certainly seem like a righteous, way of living. Like say, for instance, don't steal from your neighbor, don't sleep with another man's wife, don't worship, false idols, so on and
Yeah.
so forth. So, like, what would you say
Right.
about that? Is Satan giving that down to man?
So basically what I believe is um Yahuwah created a bunch of the Torah, which I was a Torah follower by the way, but he created the Torah which had all these commands, and he knew that it was going to be pretty borderline impossible to keep all of them, and it's basically anytime anyone violates any tiny little command, that gives Yahuwah the right to absolutely kill them. It's kind of like an abusive father type thing. It's kind of like you need to walk on eggshells, and the second you mess up, you can be murdered. So, but the thing, I'm glad you brought up the Ten Commandments, because you look at the command that you shall not murder, which is actually pretty ironic because Yahuwah is murdering people constantly in the Old Testament. So, I mean, he's kind of, at the very least, it's sort of seems like he's a do as I say, not as I do type of person. But
What would
the
you
other,
say against not to overtalk you, but before you move on
yeah,
from that point, like what would you say about someone who would argue the point that God's taking these people out for a reason? Like say for instance, like when he flooded the world or brought judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah, it was
yeah.
because of a certain reason. People were overly wicked, living in continual sin and unrighteousness. So, like, what would you say against someone who would argue that God took these people out for a righteous reason for violating His law?
I, um, first of all, the thing is, you have to think about babies that he killed off. Again, I listed off, like in the flood, I'm sure there were babies that Yahuwah completely destroyed and killed off. How can you say that that's for a righteous reason? For one. Second of all, if we start saying that stuff like that is righteous, like think about anyone that murders anyone. Like if killing a baby is for a righteous reason, you could basically always say that if someone kills someone, you can say, well, it was for a righteous reason. But the other thing you have to think about is, Jesus, when Jesus came, he never killed anyone the way Yahuwah did. And, he said, um, Jesus did the works of the Father. And if the works of the Father are killing a bunch of people, because, Jesus dealt with sinners, like he was around sinners and transgressors, but he didn't kill any of them. I mean, heck, they literally crucified the man, and he even was, when he was on the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Well, two questions I want to ask you on that, Jason. Would you
Yeah.
agree that the New Testament prophesies about Christ returning to this earth a second time? And when he returns to this earth, he's going to delete a lot of people. Do you agree with me on that or not?
Um, so are you
Like
talking
I'll
about,
give you an example. I'll
yeah.
give you an example, like Revelation the 19th chapter. John saw Christ come back his second return, and he destroyed the armies of the earth. So how would you interpret that Christ killing millions of people when he comes back to this
Yeah,
earth a second time?
basically, I don't believe that either Revelation is corrupt, which I do believe it is, but because you read Revelation, and I agree, it sounds like a lot more like the God of the Old Testament. So I believe that is either Jesus Christ. Again, I believe there were two Jesuses, and that was one thing I was going to get into. There's Jesus Barabbas, and then there's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the false savior, and Jesus Barabbas is the true savior. So I do understand that verse. Basically, I believe that that might be what it's Jesus Christ that it's talking about there. And again, um, yeah, like Revelation seems kind of more in line with the Yahuwah of the Old Testament.
Okay. Well, like if like say for instance, like if you don't want to accept the revelation, well, what about when we read in like Matthew or Mark where Christ talks about that in the future there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and some type of fire that the wicked are going to be put into. How do you interpret that?
So can we go to can you give me because um like a specific verse?
Um, I mean, I can try to pull some up on my side, but one that I could quote would be Matthew the seventh chapter, where he said that not everyone who calls upon him would make it into the kingdom of heaven, and then he rejects certain of them. Another one I could throw at you would be Matthew the 25th chapter, starting from verse 31 on down. Christ judges between two different groups of believers, but then the point is he rejects the one group and they go into fire and judgment. Are you familiar with that chapter?
Um yeah, then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you accursed, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. Yeah. Um so what I would say is I think that is the true Jesus Barabbas that's talking there. Um and I believe that the eternal fire is this realm that we're living in, because this is the place that's prepared for the devil and his angels. Um,
Well, real quick, let me read it for the audience just so they know what we're alluding to. I recommend they read the chapter from verse 31 for context, but I'll just jump straight to the point. Verse 45 and 46, it says, Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, insomuch as you did it not unto one of the least of these, you did it not unto me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. So wouldn't you agree that this is an example of Christ being harsh and sending people into punishment? So like wouldn't you say that's like on like the same level with the Old Testament God then?
I think this is different because this is like after you die and you go up into heaven and you're standing before the true um, God in heaven, the true Father in heaven above. And this isn't like going around, killing people here on this
Well,
earth.
let me just chime in on that. I don't think that's correct going by the context. Like, look at verse 31 and 32. It says, and then when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, meaning what, his second return to this earth, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from his goats. And we can read on and on, but the point is, it's talking about in the day when Christ comes back in his glory, there's going to be gathered before him all nations. So when I read that, it seems like that's happening here on this physical earth when he returns, not like an after death thing. So we might have to disagree on that, but what's your understanding of verse 31 and 32?
Okay. Now I give you credit because that does what you're saying makes sense. Like um so this is like on the judgment day. And basically Jesus or God is saying to people, depart from me into the fire, eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Um, I'm not gonna lie, like I haven't really thought of this one. I have come across this, but I'm not sure. You got me on that one. So, um,
But just so
I
I don't
guess
get confused, though, you don't
yeah.
accept the entire book of Revelation, right? So, like, say from chapter 1 to 22, you reject the whole thing.
I think it's hard to say. I think some of it might be true. It's like Satan's handbook. Like he wrote the book of Revelation and he wants to carry these things out. But
But Jason, if that's the case, so why does it talk about like Satan being defeated in Revelation? Wouldn't he not read about his downfall and being beaten?
that's yeah, that's an excellent point. Nah, I give you that. So you're right about that. It is hard to say. Um, and the other thing I wanted to say is that like again, it's difficult, but like Matthew 25 in 31 and starting in 31, yeah, like it could be talking about um this the because I do believe there was a coming of the Son of Man, as in the Son of Man is Jesus Christ because he's literally a son of man. Whereas I don't believe Jesus Barabbas was. Um, so, anyways, but Revelation, yeah, there's some things I don't know exactly what is Satan's and what is, yeah, I mean, but I do believe overall. I again, there's the verses of the devil's downfall. I just got done reading Revelation. I do agree that there are some confusing things about it. So
Okay. Well, let's just explain this from your view for the audience. So, when we read the Bible, right? So you'd say
yeah,
from Genesis all the way to Obadiah and whatever the last book of the Old Testament, all that and all those prophets, they were all being influenced by Satan. But then in the New Testament, Christ is actually the real God and exposing like the Old Testament God as being wicked. Is that your standpoint?
well, I mean, Jesus even said, "All who came before me was a thief and a robber." So yeah,
Well, I believe it was talking about like people who confess to be the Messiah and the Christ, because for like hundreds of years, people were looking for a Christ figure that was prophesied in the Old Testament that would be, come and deliver them from their sins. But you know what? That's actually a good point to mention here because chapters like Isaiah, what is that, 7:14, Isaiah 53, so on and so forth. Oh, Isaiah 63, about these Old Testament chapters predicting Christ in the future, right, being sent to forgive people of their sin. Why do you think that's in the Old Testament if that was like given down by the devil? Like why can we read about Christ in the Old Testament if that's like Satan's work there? But what's your thoughts
That
of
um yeah. So like what I would say, like some of the passages in Isaiah about, you know, the lamb being slain for our sins or whatever. Like I'm not gonna lie, uh no, it's good that I'm calling that you're bringing these up because I think like some of I guess Isaiah's the one that might have some truth in it. Um, but the other thing is, I don't believe that in the blood sacrifices in. I don't think it's like Jesus's blood that saves us. You know.
well, just so we don't get sidetracked, but elaborate on that for a minute or so. If you don't believe Christ's blood is what saves us, that He shed for us, what do you believe saves us? Just to clarify for the audience.
He basically came and showed us the way how to live, and I would say the three things required for salvation are believing in Jesus, in the Son, Jesus Barabbas, loving the Father in heaven with all your heart, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
Um, but the thing is, okay, you know that Jesus did contradict the commands in the Old Testament. You know, he said, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Which Exodus 21 says, "And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, evil for
Yeah, but
evil."
Jason, I want to point this out though, that I think you're leaving out some context. Like, say for instance, like the example you brought up in what was it, Exodus 21. That's talking about if a man hurts a woman with child in her womb and the child dies. So it's an entirely different context of what's being talked about. But something I want to ask about, that I'm a little confused about, because you mentioned, Christ and the Father, right? Christ and the Father. But that's where I'm confused because, as far as I know, the Heavenly Father would be the God of the Old Testament. So if Christ is
Yeah.
the true God in the New Testament, who is this Father over him, if not the
So
God of the Old Testament?
there's the Father in heaven above, and then there's Jesus, who is the Son of the Father. And then there's the Father of this realm, which is Satan. So the Father in heaven above is good. The Father of this earth, which rules everything, is Satan.
Well, what's the difference between the Father of this realm and the Father in heaven? Well, where would you put the difference between them? And more importantly, what one of them is the creator? Like, say, for instance, when you read Genesis about the creation of man, the creation of the fish in the sea, and the great whales in the forest, and the earth or in the sky above our head, would you say that was the devil that created that, or is that part of the real God?
Um, yeah, I'm not. There's a lot of controversy on that. But I think that it was the devil that created most of this realm. I mean,
So,
that's why there's a firmament dome over this earth, is because like this place is a prison cell and we're
but
trapped here because of Satan.
but just so I understand, Jason. So are you saying that Satan created mankind then?
Yeah, this is where it gets confusing. I think it's possible that the tree of life was actually sent by um a good is either sent by, the father, the good father in heaven, so that people could eat it and then be given actual understanding. That's why Satan didn't want Adam and Eve to eat the fruit, because then they would know that they would kind of know the truth that Yahweh was not good. And so that's why he was so angry when they ate it, you know, but
But with that, Jason, though, like the part where I'm confused is like, say, in like let's give this example in the Old Testament. If you read the book of Job, the second chapter, You see God and Satan having a conversation up in heaven with one another. Satan tells God, you see Job over there. I bet if you tempt him and it takes stuff away from him, he'll curse you and won't believe. And God said, you can go and tempt him, but you have to spare his life. So that's an
Yeah.
example where God and Satan are having a conversation with one another. And the question is, well, if Satan is this Old Testament God, then who's the God he's talking to? Like,
A couple
when you read the
things.
chapter, don't they seem like two separate beings having a
Yeah.
discussion with one
Yeah.
another?
Right. So a couple things. Like, first of all, I think it's possible that Satan is okay. I don't know totally, but I think that it could have been that there was a man named Satan that was like kind of like Yahuwah's servant, and he came to Yahuwah and asked him like, "Hey, can I torture Job?" But the other thing is they do like w- a lot of my point is like you know how psyops works. You have to include some truth with some lies in order to like throw people off. So it could have been that the book of Job, it might have just been a story of like I believe something happened, as in I believe there was a man named Job, and he was probably tortured, and he probably suffered a lot of health, and but it could have been the account that was written is not the true account, as in it might not have necessarily been like Satan going up to Yahuwah and asking him. I mean, it could have been. I don't know.
Okay. Well, one of the thing that really throws me off with this whole view you have is about like the laws and commandments, right? Because I believe I
Yeah.
asked you a couple minutes ago, you tell me that Satan was the one that gave Israel the law in Exodus the 20th chapter, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my question would be for you with that is, why do we see the law being uplifted and taught in the New Testament by Christ and the apostles? Like, I'll give you an example. This is First Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9 on down. It says, "Know ye not that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, adulterers, idolaters, effeminate, abusers of themselves of mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, revilers, or extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you, but you are washed and sanctified and changed by the blood of Christ." So that's just one example among many others where the law from the Old Testament is being taught and uplifted by the apostles and Christ in the New Testament. Well, this particular one is by Paul, but I mean, I can go to Christ's words, and I'll probably do that in a little bit, where he tells his followers to keep the law from the Old Testament. So you see the conflict there. If you're going to say that the law was given by Satan, why do we see Christ teaching to keep the law? Why do we see the apostles teaching to keep the law? Make sure.
So, you know what the law is? What did Jesus say the law is? In Matthew 7:12, he said, "In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets." And
He
second
said
of
Matthew.
all,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, Matthew 7:12, but the other thing is the Corinthians, as you know, like I don't believe Paul was I basically don't believe in Paul's writings. Um, I believe in Jesus's sayings. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about we go to Christ's teaching real quick? Bear with me 1 second. Pull this up for you. Okay. I'll give you one example from Christ's teachings here about the commandments. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 to 19. Saying the red letter, it says, "Think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I come not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, until the heaven and the earth pass away, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law, until all things be fulfilled. Therefore, whosoever shall break one of the very least commandments and teach men to do so, he'll be called the very least in the kingdom." But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So would you agree with me?
Yeah.
That's an example where Christ literally says that nothing from the law was done away with. Well, I would argue
Again,
that he's talking about the law that God gave down to Moses in Exodus the 20th chapter. If you
well,
disagree, could you address what law he's talking about?
yeah, he said what the law was in Matthew 7, which the law is to love, um, yeah, Matthew 7:12. People treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. So that's the law he's
So,
talking about.
so just so I'm not mistaken, so you're saying that the only law that Christ is telling us to follow is by treating other people nicely?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he said
Like
that.
say for instance,
That's not according to me. That's according to Christ to not Christ, sorry. That's according to him. That's what he said.
okay, well, what about where he said that not one jot or one tittle have passed away from the law? Do you know what that means?
Yeah, probably the law that he talked about in Matthew 7:12.
Okay. Hang on a second. Yeah. Well, let's look at this. So, are you aware that Christ studied the Old Testament and read and believed out of the Old Testament?
I believe that again, I believe Jesus Barabbas knows everything. So, of course he knew, but the thing is I believe again there was technically the two Jesuses. There was Jesus Christ. And I know there's the passage of him going into the synagogues on the Sabbath day, which I believe that was Jesus Christ.
Well, let me read this for the audience. This is Luke chapter 4. Let's start. Let's go to 16. We'll read on down. It says, "And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for the read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found a place where it was written, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Bear with me 1 second. And because he have anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, he hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set them at liberty, them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And he closed the book and gave it again to the minister and sat down. And the eyes of all them were upon him in the synagogue. And he began to say unto them, that this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. So that's just an example where Christ went into the synagogue.
Yes.
He opened the book of Isaiah, which was, prophet of the Old Testament God. And Christ said, this particular passage is fulfilled this day. So I think that's a big elephant in the room there with what you're saying, because Christ not only knew about the Old Testament, he didn't condemn it. He opened it up and told people this is speaking of him, this and this is fulfilled here. So why would he
Yeah,
be opening Isaiah's writings with Isaiah as a prophet of Satan? You get what I'm saying?
yeah, because that was probably Jesus Christ, is what I believe. That was not Jesus Barabbas. Again, there were two Jesuses. Jesus Christ is the one that was actually born out of Mary's womb. I don't think it probably wasn't, but they used Jesus Christ to throw us off. I don't believe Jesus Barabbas kept the Sabbath or anything.
Wait, so just so I understand, so I'm not mistaken, so are you saying that that in the Bible there's two different Jesuses that we're reading about and people are like confused about them? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Okay. Well, where would you determine between the two Christs? Like, say, for instance, did one Christ have 12 apostles and the other one have five apostles? Or like, where would you say is an example where where you can see a difference between these two different Christ characters?
Yeah. So where would I see a difference between the two different Christ characters? Well, first of all, like the example you gave, it was saying he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath, but Jesus said that he's always at work, or that his father is always at work. see, he says in John 5:17, in his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." So he doesn't have a Sabbath day. I mean, that's also testimony against Yahuwah, because in Exodus it says, or in Genesis it talks about Yahuwah resting on the Sabbath, but Jesus right here says, "My Father is always at work to this very day."
Yeah, but
So
what does he mean by work though? Because I don't know if we're seeing it wrong. I think you're saying that it's like he's actually working at like a physical job, like maybe like a seaman or something, or moving freight. But I'm viewing it as when he says he's working, that means he's going around preaching and teaching. So I think maybe we're viewing it differently by what he says
so
by work.
I mean,
But
so you're
clarify though,
just you're
like I'm
just
asking, I'm trying to clarify. Are you saying that Christ is talking about that he's like actually working a job, like somebody's paying him to like lift freight or something? Because when I read it, I'm viewing it as he's talking about like doing the work of God, like going ministering and teaching. That's how I'm understanding it. So I'm just asking, are we
I mean,
disagreeing
I
on
don't
that?
know I don't know, how do you know what kind of work he's talking about? I
Well,
mean, he just
I'd say by the context of it is what I would say.
um well, the thing is,
Like, let me give you an
um
example. Let me give you an example. Have you ever heard somebody say, I'm doing the work of the Lord? Like, say, for instance, a Christian church might do a ministry that might save up to go preach in a developing country, or might send people to go teach on the street corner. Would you agree that's doing the work of the Lord?
um ha, that's a tough one, but sure, I'll just say yes, just for the I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Okay. Because you see, here's what I'm confused about what you're saying, right? Because I've read the New Testament over a dozen times, and I don't see where there would be like two different characters of Christ, where people might be confusing two different people together. Now, I will say, I do know in the Apocrypha, which I don't believe you accept the Apocrypha, but I believe it's in the Book of Second Ezra. There's another character that's named Jesus, but that's not somebody that claims to be the Christ. That was just somebody who
Alright,
had the same, title, but I don't see it
well,
in the Gospels is what I'm saying.
you do know that there's a Jesus Barabbas, right?
Jesus Barabbas, I mean, I don't recall seeing that in the text, but you can inform us of it.
So, when Jesus is before Pontius Pilate, it says, "Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, 'Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?'" So they there was I mean, it is interesting that Barabbas had the same name. Most
Well,
like
just so I
translations,
yeah, just,
most
I'll let you continue, but I was just curious, what version of the Bible you're reading, just so I know.
hold on. Um I think it let me see. Um I think I think it might just be NIV. Let me see. Because I understand that most translations, yeah, NIV has Jesus Barabbas. Now, most translations just say Barabbas, but I'm pretty positive the original translation had uh, Jesus Barabbas, and they basically changed it to just be Barabbas.
Yeah,
Like,
like say for instance, like let me just read it out of the King James for an example. Like this is Matthew 27. I'll go to 15. It says, "Now at that feast the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner, whom they would. And they had then a noble prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore they were gathered together. Pilate said unto them, Who will you have that I release to you, Barabbas or Christ?" So in the King James, they don't call Barabbas Jesus, but for hypothetical argument, let's just say if Barabbas was called Jesus, which I don't accept that, but let's just say if that was the case, it's like, okay, but that's not really a big deal because there's multiple people called John in the Bible. So even if he was called Jesus, that doesn't like throw a big loophole into the story if even if he did have the same name. You know, get what I'm saying?
Yeah. But think about this. The crowd loved Jesus. Do you agree with that? The people, like when Jesus, people were, there was a huge crowd following him around, right?
Well, it can go both ways. There was a big crowd that hated Christ, but then there was also a big crowd that liked Christ. So it just depends on the context. Like, say, for instance, like if we're talking about the courtroom that we read about here in the Matthew 26, well, these people screamed aloud that they want Christ to be crucified. They want him to be crucified. So the large majority of the people here in this court appearance, they didn't like Christ. They rather have
That's
Barabbas released to them.
that's my point as to why Jesus Barabbas was probably the true Jesus. Read Matthew 15. It says Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee, and then he went up on the mountainside, sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples and to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. So people had been following him for 3 days. The crowd loved him. So when he gets to being standing before Pilate, the crowd begs for Jesus Barabbas. That's my point. That Jesus Barabbas was probably the true Jesus,
Well,
because why
well,
is
let
the
me
crowd like the
Okay,
crowd
well, let
that
me
loved
explain
him?
why I'm seeing it differently, right? Well, it's true that there were crowds that did like Christ and follow his teachings. That is true. But what I would argue is here in this courtroom, the vast majority of the people were against the Christ. And like, say, for instance, Pilate's asking them, who do you want me to release to you? Do you want me to release this violent prisoner, Barabbas, or do you want me to release Christ to you? And the people were saying, well, Christ said, he's the true king. He would tear this kingdom down in one day, right? Tear the temple down in one day and build it up, right? So they wanted him crucified because they believed that he was a false Christ. So people wanted to see Christ be crucified way more. What's the word I'm looking for? They wanted to see him crucified compared to Barabbas because Barabbas was just some criminal that was like, murdering or stealing. So they wanted to see Christ get crucified because he claimed to be the Christ. So that's why they
Well,
wanted him to be crucified more than Barabbas.
actually, um, if you read um in verse, wait, hold on, let me find it. In verse 20, it says, but the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. So right here, it's saying that the reason they somehow were able to get them to go after Barabbas is because of the chief priests and elders were persuaded them, which I
Right.
believe I believe that part was added in to like so that people would think, oh, that's the reason
Well,
that.
Pilate didn't want to crucify Christ, right? And his wife wanted Christ to be set free as well. But Pilate letted the multitude of people decide because, say, if he released Christ, there would be a big uproar, and that could threaten his power because the people wanted Christ to be crucified. So, and even notice in the story, Pilate says, after he gives the people their will and condemns Christ, he washes his hands and said, "This innocent man's blood is not upon him." Right? You familiar
Yeah,
with that part? So he didn't
yeah.
want Christ to be crucified, but he had to bend his knee to the roar of the crowd, because otherwise they might take his power from him. They might uproar against him if he doesn't follow their will and demand. So Pilate, he didn't want Christ to have to die, but he decided to give the crowd what they screamed and yelled for. So that's what I'd have to say on that. If you got something else, you can add it in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he didn't want Christ, the Freemason Jesus, to die because he probably was in cahoots with, all the government or whatever.
Like, let
And
me read this
so,
verse before you continue, not to overtalk you, but just for the audience so they know what I was talking about. This is Matthew 27, verse 24, 25. It says, when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but rather a tumult was made among the crowd, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye be to it. Then answered all the people and said, his blood will be upon us and our children. So
yeah.
that's what I got to say on it, Mike.
So think about the confidence they had to say, his blood is on us and on our children, because they were confident in having Jesus Christ, and basically, um, they were confident in having Jesus Barabbas released because they believed that he was the true Jesus. So yeah,
But you see, like what I'm saying is that, yeah, I think we're just gonna have to disagree on that because I'm not seeing where this Barabbas is the real Christ. I'm not even seeing where
okay,
he's being
I
called
I can
Christ. I
I
think we're
can
just gonna have
explain.
to disagree on that point.
Do you okay, you know that Jesus said that, or, do you agree that he came in his Father's name?
Who, Christ?
Jesus.
Sure.
John 5:43, I've come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. If someone else comes in his own name, you will accept him. Did you know that Barabbas means son of the Father? Bar means son, Abba means father.
No, sir, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But
So
I
how
would,
how would how would
say
Jesus
for
Christ come in his Father's name? If I mean Christ, I think, um
well, like
yeah,
say for instance, even if somebody has a name that can mean a certain thing, doesn't mean that they're that. Like I'll give you an example. I know a guy whose name is Jesus. That doesn't mean he's Jesus from the Bible. I have a friend named John. That doesn't mean that he's Apostle John just because they have the same name. You get what I'm saying?
yeah. But
So even if somebody's name means something, it doesn't mean that they're that thing.
how did Jesus Christ
Like
come
I'll
in the
give you an
name of the
example.
Father?
I met somebody the other day named Apollyon. Does that mean that he's the Apollyon in the Book of Revelation?
No.
No, just because they have the same name, right?
No. But
Okay, good.
how did Jesus Christ come in the name of the Father? Like, what, I mean, I know the thing is, what they'll try to say is that his true name is Yahusha or whatever, but we don't, um I don't really, I don't know. I Because the thing is, what we all we have, the New Testament, it was written in, what we have is a Greek translation. So I mean, it might have just been I believe it was just written in Greek. And all, like, technically, it's like, if you read what the Greek says, it's like Jesus Christos. Although I kind of believe that the true name really was Jesus. Like, they literally said Jesus. Like, um, but my point is, Jesus Barabbas makes sense because it is this that he came in his Father's name. Jesus Christ, how is that coming in your Father's name? You know?
Well, as far as the name, like many people would disagree on the name. Like, say for instance, like even I would say that they didn't pronounce him as Christ because the letter J was invented in the year 1524, and there's not a J in the Hebrew. So as far as the name, I mean, people could debate all about that, for days on end about the name. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. But the thing is, Matthew 16:20, he was kind of saying not to tell people he was the Christ. It said, then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. So he was saying, don't call me the Christ. Um, Mark 8:29, and he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answereth and saith unto him, thou art the Christ. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him. And then Matthew 24:5, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. So that's what that's saying is, people are going to say that Jesus Barabbas was the Christ and deceive many, because he's not the Christ. He's the son of the Father.
Okay. Now, when we see Christ perform miracles, does he tell people to keep this thing like privately? Right. In certain examples, he tells them, don't go, and yell and scream this. But then in other circumstances, he'll have it be known and open. So I would say that it just changes from context on in what circumstance we're talking about. Sometimes Christ performs miracles in private and tells people not to go tell everybody openly. Other times he'll do it openly so thousands see it. So I wouldn't use that as an argument because we see Christ do both performances, both privately and openly in public. In fact, what is that? John, the last book of John, last chapter and verse says that Christ did so many miracles and things that even the whole world couldn't contain the pages that could be written about the things Christ done while he was here. So there's so many events that Christ had, so many talkings that he's had with
Yeah.
people that are not written down in the text. So I mean, I wouldn't really use that as an argument.
Well, it is interesting though that he's saying, because I think that, because a lot of the way we perceive that is, oh, he just doesn't want people going around spreading this news, but I think it's more just like he's saying, don't call me the Christ. That's all it is.
Like say, like let me give you an example. Like how in certain examples where Christ went into like a crowd of people and he put like a cloak over him so people wouldn't recognize him. Why is that? Because well, for two reasons. People who loved him would, try to, get him to do whatever they need. People that hated him will know where he is, try to capture him. So multiple different reasons why Christ would try to move around under the radar. Like say for instance, Christ back then to many people was a celebrity. Many hated him, many loved him. Just like how celebrities today got to walk around, covered up, put coats on, right? Wear different type of makeup in public so
Yeah.
people don't recognize them, so they don't get swarmed by people who either love him or hate him. You know what I'm saying? So same thing for Christ back then.
Okay. Wait.
Well, I'm saying, would you disagree with me on that? Like, is that not a true statement?
Can you give me a specific passage?
I mean, I off the top of the head, I couldn't give it, but I'm saying if you're familiar with the New Testament, you can account certain times that Christ went into like um masses of people and he had to put a cloak over himself so people wouldn't recognize who he is in certain circumstances. Like you're telling me you've never heard about that in the New Testament before? Like just to clarify, have you just read the New Testament one time or have you studied it
Yeah.
multiple times?
Um, I've read it one time. I'm studying it right now again. Um, yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So you're Man, it's just a little confusing to me because I think we're going all over the place. So, on one hand, the God of the Old Testament is the devil. Then in the New Testament, that Christ is the real God. But then there's also a second Christ that's in the New Testament that is faking people out as well. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot to try to wrap our mind around here, man. But let's I guess go back to this subject here because I would argue this is a point against the whole belief in general because I've shown where Christ taught people to live in accordance with the law of God that we read about in the Old Testament. Christ never told people that now it's okay to steal, now it's okay to commit adultery, now it's okay to worship
Um,
idols of stone or silver or brass,
except
right?
except he said, um in Matthew 5, he says, "You have heard that it was said to people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made." And then he says,
Right.
"But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne. All you need to say is simply yes or no." And then it says anything beyond this comes from the evil one, which is interesting because in Deuteronomy 6:13 it says, "Revere Yahuwah your Elohim and serve him, and swear by his name, which that word swear can mean to take an oath. Whereas Jesus says not to take an oath. And then he says anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So I do not agree that he upholds all of the law in the Old Testament.
Okay, well, let's clarify that. When you say he don't upload all the law, so would you agree he uploads, or excuse me, not upload, upholds some of it then?
Dude, like think about, do you uphold some of the American law?
No, I don't believe in America. Now, if you're gonna say, like, say for instance, not stealing from people, not murdering, yeah, I'll back that, but not because America
Exactly.
says so, but because the law of God says so, not because some politician in America claims that. That's just
And
morally wrong.
that's the same thing with Jesus. He upholds don't lie or don't murder, but not because Yahuwah said so, just because it's wrong, you know?
But what about when Christ talks about that it's for man to live by every word of God? So what's that God he's talking about? Because I teach you that
Probably the God
he's
of the
talking about the
Father in
God of
heaven
the Old
above.
Testament.
How do you know?
How do I know? Well, because by reading the context. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, look at Matthew 5. Let's look at the last verse. A red letter says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect."
Yeah.
Right? So what Father is that? I'd argue that's talking
That's the
about the Old
Father in
Testament God.
heaven. That's the Father in heaven above.
Okay, but again, here's the part where we're getting confused, is because as far as I'm aware, when the Bible talks about the Heavenly Father, it's referring to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Old Testament. But you're saying that there's another Heavenly Father that's in the New Testament that is not the same Father from the Old Testament.
The
So that's like
Father
the
of
elephant in the room.
Okay, bro. The Father of the Old Testament is the Father of the God of this world, this realm that we're living in. This realm is beneath, heaven is above.
Hang on a second. So when you say the God of this world, this verse came up to me. Maybe you're quoting this one. This is here for 1 second. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. It says, "In whom the God of this world have blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine upon them." So when you talk about the Father being the God of this world, is that a verse that you're quoting?
Um, sure. I think, yeah, I would probably say that that's the God of this world that's blinding people is Yahuwah, the evil one. Now,
Okay, I mean,
look at Psalm 24:1. The earth belongs to Yahuwah and all that fills it, the world and those who dwell in it. Um, so
right. But I'm
yeah.
saying what's wrong? But what's wrong with that though? Like I don't get what the problem is.
Yeah, no, I guess my point is that this earth belongs to Yahuwah, as in this he's the God of this earth is Yahuwah, which um it it's the evil one because the other okay, I guess this just goes into, Matthew 4:8. Now, do you, because my question to you is, do you believe that the devil is like rules the world?
Well, let me answer it this way. The God, right, the Most High God has power over all the world, but he can give Satan a power on earth, but Satan still is Serbian underneath him. Like, I'll give you an example. Like Job chapter 9, verse 24, it says, "For the earth was given into the hands of the wicked." The Bible talks about that Satan would be, allowed to go around the earth for a period of time, tricking or deceiving or whatnot, right? About how he'd be the kings of the earth would be able to work with Satan, right, with demons behind the scenes to pull political powers and strings and whatnot. So yes, God can allow Satan to do certain things on earth, but at the end of the day, God has control over all of those things. Like I'll give an example. Like I showed you in Job the second chapter, God told Satan, "You can go and tempt Job, but you have to spare his life." And Satan went and he obeyed God. So he could do whatever he wanted. He could bring this temptation on him. He could take this thing from him. He could take that thing from Job, but he had to spare his life because God put that restriction upon him. We see same thing with demons. What about, and was it Mark the 5th chapter? The demon said, "Yeah, we fear you, Christ. We know you are the Son of God. Give us permission. We'll come out of the pigs. Excuse me, we'll come out of the man, go into the herd of swine at your command." Christ said to do it, and they listened to him. So both the devil and demons, they have to operate underneath God's authority. I'll give you a bonus example. In the book of what is that, First Kings 22, 18, and 19, God asked, who's going to go be a lying spirit in the mouth of this king? A spirit on this hand said he'll do it. A spirit on that hand said something else. And God said, yeah, you can go and be a lying spirit in the mouth of this king. So those are a couple examples where God has power over both the right and the left hand, both angels and demons. Mike Schurz.
Okay. Again, I think that it's possible that there's there's Yahweh, and then there's a Satan figure, and Satan sometimes gets permission from Yahweh to do certain evil things. But the thing that's interesting is, that Yahweh sent evil spirits into people.
Yeah.
Here, which, like in 1 Samuel 16:14-15, and the ruah of Yahweh turned aside from Shaul, and an evil spirit from Yahweh troubled him. And the servants of Shaul said to him, "Look now, an evil spirit from Elohim is troubling you," which is interesting. So Yahweh is sending evil spirits into people. Like, what would you think if someone sent an evil spirit into someone? Like, you would probably think they're a witch or a Satanist or something.
Well, no, I'd say it's being done for certain reasons. Like, say, I'll give you an example. Like when God hardened the heart of Pharaoh so that he wouldn't let Israel go. God did that for a reason because he wanted to punish the Egyptians and show his power through them. You know what I'm saying? So these things are done for a reason, is what I would argue.
Well, yeah, like Yahweh, or yeah, he hardened Pharaoh's heart, which actually, when you think about it, it's like, why would I mean, I guess the reason was, I don't know. Like, I would say that that's Yahweh doing that,
Well,
but
let's clarify this because I think there is an elephant in the room that's not being addressed because it makes it sound like you're saying that we're talking about, right, less, religious guys that hold to the Old Testament. I think you are of the premise that we believe that the Old Testament God is just all love and peace and sunshine and rainbows. No, we acknowledge the God of the Old Testament creates both good and evil. He brings punishment upon nations of people. He kills certain people. But
yeah,
the difference between you and me is I'm saying God's doing these things for a reason. I'm not saying God himself is
he's
evil, but I
so you're
acknowledge that he creates both the good and the
you,
evil.
you mean
Like I'll give
you
Go ahead.
mean he's doing these things for a good reason? Is that what you're saying?
These things happen for a reason. Like say for instance, answer this question directly. When God brought the judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah, did he do that for a reason?
Well, yeah, I mean, the question is more of, was it a good reason or a bad reason?
But what do you think? I don't know if you've read about the story, but it talks about all these wicked, heinous acts that were going on. Hell, men wanted to even sleep with the angels that came to see Lot. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So there's a lot of wicked stuff going on in that city. So would you say God
Again,
justified by bringing damnation on that city?
I would say, like, maybe some of the people deserved to die, but the thing is, think about, again, what about the babies that are getting torn apart and destroyed in these stories? Is
Well,
that
here's
for
where
a
we
good
might
reason?
here's where we might differ because I believe that there's a reincarnation. So some of those the
No, I
spirits in
believe
those
that too.
right, so some of the spirits in those children could have been wicked from their past life, so now they're being judged harshly for something they might have committed in the past. That's one example I can
So
give for it.
would you
But let
agree
me let
that
me ask you.
Yahweh
Well,
is a
okay.
hypocrite then, because he says do not murder, but yet he's murdering people.
Well, no, as I just explained to you, God's destroying these people for a reason. God's
You
bringing
can
judgment upon these
so
nations for a
s-
reason. Let me ask you a question, Jason. When Christ comes back, is Christ going to kill women and children?
um I believe that are you talking about the day of the Lord?
Yes, when Christ returns to this world a second time, hey, the Bible says that the day of the Lord is going to be darkness and gloominess. When Christ
Yeah.
returns to this world a second time, is Christ going to kill both men, women, and children? Yes or no?
If Christ, yeah, the false Jesus, yeah, he'll do that because that's
Wait,
what he's
but
all about.
clarify, what do you mean
Remember,
this false
as
Jesus?
you
Wait,
even
wait,
said, you
wait,
even
but
said that
Jason,
there will be
now I'm
darkness.
hey Jason, just hold on one second. Now I'm a little confused. You say, yeah, the false Jesus. So hold up a second. So you're saying a false Jesus is coming to return to the world? I'm talking about the real Christ that we read about in the New Testament. Now you're telling me there's a fake Christ coming back to the world?
I to-
Where's
I
that at?
told I told you there's Jesus Barabbas and there's Jesus Christ.
You told me that, but you didn't tell me anything about two second comings of a fake Christ
So
and a real Christ.
obviously there's the day of the Lord, the day of Yahuwah, which is probably in cahoots with JC. Um, but that's because Yahuwah's day in Isaiah 13. See, the day of Yahuwah is coming fierce with wrath and heat of displeasure to lay the earth waste and destroy its sinners from it. Their infants will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be looted and their wives violated. So that's yeah, and you even said there's going to be darkness and gloominess, but
Do you
I
know
think
what verse I'm quoting or not? I'm quoting, well, I don't know if you accept it. I'm quoting, what is it, Amos 5:18 on down. I don't know if you accept Amos
but
because that might be from Satan, you said, right? The Old Testament.
yeah, because think about it like isn't in First John it says in God is light and in him there is no darkness or something.
I'm sorry, you said what?
Um didn't in First John didn't he say there's no darkness in him? So
Yeah.
First John 1:5 God is light, in him there is no darkness at all. So if we're talking about some kind of darkness that's coming, that's probably not from the God of heaven above.
Okay, so say for instance, like when God brings judgment upon certain nations, you're saying that could be a darkness, then is what you're saying, right?
Well,
So,
didn't
but what by
I'm
that same
just
line of notion, then, so when Christ comes back to judge the nations, wouldn't you call that darkness then too by that logic?
well, I don't I was going off what you said when you said there's going to be darkness or something, and I was like, well, that's probably not of the Father in heaven above.
Okay. Bear with me one second. Do you accept the book of Peter? Is Peter a false apostle, or do you accept him?
I believe Peter was probably a false apostle.
Man, do you believe any of the apostles, or all of them like fake?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm still trying to figure that out. But Peter, in fact, I would go as far as saying it's possible Peter was Judas. I mean,
Wow.
you know how Jesus said didn't he confront Peter and say like, "Get behind me, Satan," or something like that?
Yes. But do you
Yeah.
know why that was?
Well, I know the explanation would be that like because Peter probably was doing something wrong.
Well, no, let
Uh,
me explain to you. The reason they said that is because Peter denied knowing Christ multiple times. Right, Peter just said that somebody asked Peter, "I thought I saw you there walking with him." And he said, "No, no, I don't know him. I don't know that man." He said it multiple times when people asked him. So,
yeah.
and he was trying, a matter of fact, when Christ told him to get behind me, Satan, that was because Peter was trying to tell Christ, what do you mean that you have to be crucified? Why not just like, hide or something? Like, why must you be crucified? And Christ told him, paraphrasing, he told him, get behind me, Satan. I got to do, the Father's business. So Peter in that instance went against what Christ's mission was. Now, that doesn't mean that Peter's now the devil. It's just in that instance, he was going against what Christ's mission was. So Christ had
Well,
to correct him.
it is interesting that when like didn't Jesus like say one of you is a devil or something.
Yeah, but he was talking about Judas Iscariot because he didn't betray him yet. That was at the Last Supper, and then like the night after they ate, he got betrayed by Judas Iscariot for 30 some pieces of silver.
Yeah. So the interesting thing
So he
is
was the devil that he
there's
was
one
quoting.
there's
I'm
one
sorry, go ahead.
person that he said, get behind me, Satan, and he's talking to um Peter, and then later he says like one of you is a devil, and I kind of believe that the Judas there is Simon Peter, but
But how
um
could they be the same person if Peter was one of the apostles and Judas Iscariot was one of the other apostles? So how could they be the
there's
same person if they were both a separate apostle?
there's some deception with that name. Like,
Like I'll give you an example before you continue. Like and this is a great point that needs to be mentioned. Like when you read about the Last Supper, the apostles started to ask Christ, who's going to betray you? Is it I? And Christ said no. Next one said, is it I? And it said no. And then, Peter, John, they asked. And then when it came to Judas Iscariot, he asked, is it I? And Christ said, yeah, you have said, right? As you said. So that's an example to show it they're not the same person because we see an instance where both Peter and Judas Iscariot are talking to Christ, showing that they're two separate beings, two separate people. What's your thoughts on that?
can you show me the specific verses?
I mean, I could quote Matthew the 26th chapter about the Last Supper.
Um,
Yeah, I'll look over and see if I can give you a direct verse on it.
I'm reading it right now. So, I mean, like, yeah, if you read in Matthew 26, I don't think I mean, it mentions Judas, and then it later
No,
mentions.
I found it. I found it. Let me read it for you in the audience here. This is Matthew 26. Let's go to verse 20 on down. It says, when the evening was come, he sat down with the 12 apostles, and they did eat. And he said, verily I say unto you that one of you will betray me. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. Son of God goes as it is written of him. But woe unto that man whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had never been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? And he said unto him, as thou says. So there's the example there. The apostles, they all ask, is it I that's going to betray you? Christ said no. But then when they got to Judas, Christ said, yeah, as you said. So there's that right there.
Yeah. Um, but I think it's possible Judas is Peter. But actually, this isn't like I understand. I don't know. I can't say for certain, but regardless, I'm not really this isn't a huge point that I wanted to bring up. Um
Well, let me say
so
this though, Jason. It's actually kind of difficult to argue with what you're saying because you don't really accept most of the precepts that I would go to refute what you're saying. Like, say for instance, I can't talk much about Christ bringing judgment upon the world because you don't accept the book of Revelation. So if I go to Revelation 15, the 6th chapter, the 19th chapter, or so on and so forth, you can just say, oh, well, I don't accept that. Say for another example, I was going to go to the book of 2nd Peter, chapter 3, verse 10 on down, talking about the day of the Lord, right, coming out. I'll just read it real quick for the people. 2nd Peter chapter 3, verse 10, it says, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, which in the heavens will pass away with a great noise, the elements will melt with fervent heat, and the earth also and the works that are therein will be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought we to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of the Lord, wherein the heavens will be on fire and be dissolved, and the elements will be belt with fervent heat. But nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth, wherein dwells righteousness. So I can't even go there with your view because you don't accept Peter either. You know what I'm saying? So I have to
Yeah.
try to pick and choose what passages to go to because you reject, oh, and then you reject Paul as well. You know what I'm saying? So I kind of have to like throw out half of the New Testament to deal with your view. You know what I'm saying? So it's
Yeah.
not really easy to deal with what you're saying because you reject half of the New Testament and then claim that the Old Testament is by Satan. So I really can't go there either. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay. You've been like asking me questions for a while. Can I
Yeah,
go
I mean,
back to
I
some
don't
of
care
my
if you want to ask me a question or two, that's fine. All you had to do is ask, man.
All right. So like Revelation Okay. Would you at least agree that like let me just read so Revelation 12:9 says, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, and he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So if the devil is a dragon, just keep that in mind. And you read 2 Samuel 22, it says, "In my distress I called upon Yahuwah, and my Elohim I cried. And from his Hakal he heard my voice, and my cry was heard in his ears. And the earth shook and trembled, the nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Or smoke went up from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. And he bowed the Shamaim and came down, and a dense cloud covered his feet, and he put darkness around him as booths." So the point is, like, the description here of Yahuwah sounds like a dragon with smoke coming from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth.
Okay, yeah, my response would be is that's not true. The devil's not a dragon. Matter of fact, in Revelation the 12th chapter, this dragon here that was wroth with the woman and her child.
Yeah.
Most people, even the Christian church, would argue that's talking about the Roman Empire and referencing back to Mary and the birth of Christ. So they'd argue that the Roman Empire represents the great red dragon here. But as far as Satan, like say if it refers to him as a roaring lion, like what is that? Ephesians the 6th chapter talks about how the devil, like a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he might devour. That doesn't literally mean the devil is now a dragon or a lion walking around trying to eat people. It's just like a metaphoric figure of speech. So I would argue that your question there about the devil being a dragon, that's not literal. But I also want to show you another example where even people, as I thought we could agree earlier, if we saw Peter got called Satan or the devil, but there's another example. Like if we go back to Isaiah the 14th chapter, the king of Babylon gets called Lucifer. Like look at this. This is Revelation, or excuse me, not Revelation, Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. It says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, thou son of the morning, who are cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in your heart, I will ascend into the heavens, exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the throne of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell to the sides of the pit." Now, real quick, this is not talking about the devil. This is not talking about Satan. This is actually a reference to the king of Babylon. Look at verse 4. It says, "And thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, How have the golden city ceased? And so on and so forth." And it goes down and down until you get to 12. So this whole proverb is talking about the king of Babylon exhorting himself on high and how he's going to be humbled and brought down low. So even though it calls him Satan or Lucifer, ascending above the heights of the clouds, it's metaphorical language talking about someone on high, putting himself on a pedestal and being brought down low to a low condition. So that'll be my
Okay.
answer for you, Mike Shears.
What? So who would you say Leviathan is? Just out of curiosity.
Leviathan. Well, if you read the was that Job the 40th and 41st
41. Yeah.
chapter. Those are two creatures like the behemoth in Job 40 is talking about a sauropod dinosaur, and as far as the Leviathan is talking about some type of like sea beast that roams in the ocean. That's what that's talking about.
Well, it's really interesting how the description of Yahuwah in 2 Samuel 22 is very similar to the description of Leviathan in Job 41, where it says, "Can you drag out Leviathan with a fishhook and press down his tongue with a rope? His sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eye of dawn. From his mouth go burning torches, sparks of fire leap forth. From his nostrils, smoke goes out as from a boiling pot and burning reeds. His breath sets coals aglow, and a flame goes forth from his mouth." And then it says, "He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride." So the similarities are the fire coming out of his mouth, the smoke coming out of his nostrils, and the coals setting coals aglow. So, I mean, I'm just pointing out that it is really interesting that we have a description for Yahuwah and a description for Leviathan that are strikingly similar.
Well, what would you say? Well, we'll take this with a grain of salt from your view because you don't accept revelation. But if you did, I'd have to ask you about this. Well, how about when we see the Christ being described, it says that his eyes were like as fire, and he had a sharp sword that came out of his mouth. With it, he slain the nations. Wouldn't you
Yeah.
say that's also similar, even though you
Yeah.
don't accept that?
That's my point. That's
But
probably
I'm saying that's not really a point for your point. I'd argue it proves that you're wrong, but the whole premise that you had again, it's very confusing trying to argue with your position because you throw out half of the New Testament, reject the Old Testament as the word of the devil. So, it's really kind of hard to
well, I accept
talk to
Jesus
with what you're
Barabbas and
saying
his
because you
words.
you only really subscribe to like maybe what a dozen of the books, if even that even. You know what I'm saying? So it's a kind of a difficult conversation
You
because
haven't even really
I can't really go to many verses because you reject them. You know what I'm saying?
you haven't even really like addressed this question like
What's the question?
what would be your explanation for the similarities between Yahuwah and Leviathan?
Um, I would say you have to read it again. What do you quote for me?
So 2 Samuel 22, 7 to 17 is the description of Yahuwah. And then Job 41, starting in verse 17.
Now, real quick,
Yeah,
you said Second Samuel. What chapter? I didn't hear.
22.
Okay.
Starting at from verse 7 to 17.
Okay. Yeah, give me a second just to look over it.
That's fine. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, it looks like from what I'm reading here, that he's like speaking of the Lord, referencing the Lord. So I see a few comparables that you're trying to make, but I'd argue that these are comparisons we see all throughout the Bible. Like, I'll give an example. Like, I don't think you accept the Apocrypha, but in the Apocrypha, it talks about the Lord shall threaten, he shall thunder, right? And send threats upon the people, send devastations upon the people, and stuff like that. So these are just men of the Lord referencing God, talking about that we have to, fear the Lord because God can bring these things upon you, if you don't fear the Lord. So I wouldn't say it they're the same thing, even if there's two or three correlations between them. I would just say that he's describing the Lord and why he has to, fear the Lord, is what I would argue.
I mean, it's kind of hard to ignore I mean, smoke coming out of your nostrils, fire coming out of your mouth, setting coals aglow, and then like it even says
Right, but I'm
sneezes.
saying I pinned you on this though, because I pointed out the New Testament says the same thing about Christ, that he had eyes like a flame of fire and a sharp sword out of his mouth, with it he slain the nations. But the problem is you don't accept those verses about Christ. but the point is that they're in there. So like,
That
wouldn't
might
you, by that logic, wouldn't you say Christ is like wicked too? Then, if he's has eyes like a flame of fire, and has a sword out the mouth that is going to slay the nations.
I
Now, your
said
only
that
argument is that you don't accept those verses. Is
well,
really
I
all you can
said
say.
that there's a Jesus Christ and a Jesus Barabbas. So that could be Jesus Christ that it's talking about there, as opposed to Barabbas. Um, but the thing is, you have to admit something is interesting because First John 1:5 says God is light and in him there is no darkness at all. But yet in 2 Samuel 22, like it says in 2 Samuel 22, verse 12, it says he put darkness around him as booths. So, I mean,
What verse you quoting here for me? Let me look at it. What verse?
1 John 1:5, and then 2 Samuel 22:12.
Okay. Yeah, like let me just read a little bit of this for the audience so we can see here. Like let's say I'll start at verse 8. It says, Then the earth shook and trembled, the foundations of heaven moved and shook, because he was wroth. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out his mouth devoured, coals were kindled before it. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and the heavens, darkness was under his feet, and he rode upon a cherub and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness for villains under round about him, dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. For the brightness before him were coals of fire kindled. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. Yeah, like look at the next one. It says, and he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning, and discomforted them. Yeah, so it's just talking about like God's judgment he can bring upon people. So some of this is metaphorical, not supposed to be taken as like literal. Some of this is just like a metaphorical thing. Like I'll give an
Yeah,
example, like how it says that Christ's eyes were as a flame of fire. That doesn't literally mean that there were fire in his eye sockets, just meant that he was very angry and he had red eyes. Matter of fact, if you read Genesis, what is that, 49 verse 12, it says, For his teeth will be white with milk and his eyes shall be red with wine, just as a reference. So a lot of these points you're bringing up are just like metaphorical, allegorical sayings. It's not like it's literal. Like, say, for instance, it says, one of the verse I read over, it says that he came down. So do you believe that God ever came down to earth? Or do you agree that that part's like not literal?
wait, what verse?
Let me see real quick. Yeah, I started at verse 8 and wrote and read on down.
Yeah, no, I believe like
Yeah,
in
verse
this
10.
instance,
Let me quote verse 10. It said, He bowed down the heavens also and came down, and darkness was
yeah,
under his feet. So when it says he came down, does that mean that he came down to the earth, or do you agree that's not literal?
yeah, I believe that yes, Yahweh literally came to wherever, like when this person called upon Yahweh, like he literally came, like um yeah,
So, like, say for
and that
instance, it says in the same passages down here that he rode upon a cherub, right? So, did somebody look up in the sky and actually see God, the Creator, on a cherub coming down, or is that like metaphoric language? Like, look at verse 11. It says, And he rode upon a cherub and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. What do you understand that to mean?
I mean, I kind of think it might have been literal if I had to guess. Um,
Okay.
but
But real quick though, yeah,
the
I'll
other
let you continue, but I just want to point out though, but isn't this, by your logic and reasoning, isn't this chapter about the devil though? Because the Old Testament God is Satan from your view earlier. So even if, for hypothetical example, even if you were right about it being literal, isn't it still about the devil, the fake God from your just view earlier?
yeah, that's my
Okay,
point.
continue.
Well, my point was that the description is very similar to Leviathan. And anyways, Um. Okay. I kind of want to get to my next point.
Sure.
So there's two accounts of something that happened. If you read First Chronicles 21:1 and Second Samuel 24:1, I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, "And Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. And David said to Joab and to the rulers of the people, Go number Israel from Beersheba to Dan and bring the number of them to me so that I know it." Then in Second Samuel 24:1, it says, "And again the displeasure of Yahuwah burned against Israel and moved David against them to say, Go number Israel and Judah. And the sovereign said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, Go, please, throughout all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and register the people, so that I know the number of the people." So it is really interesting that it's almost two accounts of the same story, but one of them calls the person that's going against Israel Satan, and the other account is saying Yahuwah that's going against Israel.
Yeah, I'd respond and just say it's God using Satan to do it would be my argument. Like, remember I told you, gave you the example earlier from, what was that? It was First Kings or Second Kings, chapter 22, verse 18 and 19, about a lying spirit going from God to be a lying spirit in the mouth of the king. I'll see if I can pull it up for you here. Bear with me a second. Internet's being a little slow, so I need a second here.
Again, why would a good father send evil spirits into people? That's my point. That's probably Yahuwah, which is not that'd be a work of the devil to send an evil spirit or send
But the problem is that the Bible says that spirits, both on the right hand and on the right hand, are underneath God's authority. Like, you're not familiar with the example in Mark the fifth chapter. Are you familiar with that or not?
um could you bring up, maybe I am, but I just don't remember.
Okay. Bear with me for a second. Yeah, I'll pull that up for you. Yeah, I mean, if you start reading, all right, I'll just read from the top for you. It says, Mark 5, and they came unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the uh, Garidans. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tomb a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with feathers and with chains. And the chains he have been plucked asunder by him, and the feathers broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Christ afar off, he ran down and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Christ, thou Son of God? I acquire thee by God, and thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered and said, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. And there was nigh unto them a mountain with great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, and we may enter into them. And forthwith Christ gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. And they were about 2,000, and they were choked in the sea. And if you read on down, the man was basically healed of this legion of devils. But the point of the matter is the demons obeyed Christ and acknowledged him to be the Son of God.
Yeah. So you have to think about a couple things here. Like, notice how Jesus didn't just, like, you know how Yahuwah is sending evil spirits into people. Jesus never sent an evil spirit into anyone. If anything, he cast, as you brought up, he cast evil spirits out of people. And I don't. I mean, it sounds like he gave them permission to go into the swine of pigs. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily casting the evil spirits into anyone, but even if you wanted to say that, oh, he's casting the evil spirits into someone, I mean, he's casting them into pigs and not people.
All right, bear with me 1 second. I gotta pull this up. Okay, so this is what I was quoting. This is the book of 1 Kings chapter 22, and I'm going to start verse 18. It says, "And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, Do not I tell thee that he would prophesy no good concerning me, but evil? And he said, Hear thou before the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and with all the host of heaven standing by him on his right hand and on his left hand. And the Lord said unto them, Who shall persuade, Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said on this manner, another said on that manner. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord, and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said unto him, Wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, Thou shalt persuade him and prevail also. Go therefore and do so. Now, listen here. Now, therefore, behold, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these thy prophets, and the Lord has spoken evil concerning thee. So that's an example where God is sending a lying spirit into the mouth of a king or false prophet to persuade them to do something. What's your thoughts on that?
Dude, this is, if
But let me
anything, this all.
let me take a guess though. Let me take a guess real quick. You'll just say that just proves that the God of the Old Testament is the devil, right? But I'm bringing it up to show an
Well,
example
first
where
of
God
all,
does send a false spirit to lie or deceive somebody. Like yours.
yeah. Okay. If anything, I feel like this does prove my point because he says, he saw the Lord sitting on his throne. Didn't Jesus say that no one has seen the Father?
Okay, like say for instance, with this notion, do you reject Daniel as well, or how about if you read, was it Acts the
It's
seventh chapter? Hear me out 1 second. Acts the seventh chapter, when Stephen was stoned by the people, he said he looked up to the heaven and he saw God and Christ sitting on the right hand of God the Father. So do you not accept them either because they claim to saw God on his throne and Christ next to him on the throne?
it's
Or what
not
about when
me.
Daniel
It's
describes he saw God sat upon his throne? He saw the Ancient of Day sat upon his throne. Do you
again,
reject these examples too? I'm just curious.
it's not me that rejects this. It's Jesus that rejects this when he said no one
Wait,
has ever
but
seen God.
Jason, clarify
I
for
mean,
me. Wait, but Jason, stop being upset real quick. I just want to clarify what you're saying. So, are you saying that Daniel's lying when he saw the Ancient of Days sat upon his throne, and when Stephen looked up to heaven and saw God on this throne and Christ sitting next to him? Would you say they're lying about that, or were they deceived, or do you reject them? Or I need an answer for that.
yeah. What does John 1:18 say?
What's it say? I might have to pull it up. You said John 1:18.
Yes.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, it says, No man having seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he declared unto him.
Yeah.
Okay, now, real quick, I want to point out when these men saw God, they didn't see his face. They just seen his figure on the throne sitting, but they did not see the face of God. It was like blurred out with some type of light. So nobody has seen the face of God upon his throne. They just seen his outlier on his throne. So just to clarify that. So yeah, I agree with what Christ said. Nobody has seen the face of
He
God.
didn't
Nobody has
he
seen
didn't
God.
he didn't say the face. He didn't say no one has seen
Well,
the face.
I'm
He
telling
said
you,
no
that's
one
what
has
he.
seen.
Okay, so Jason, here's the problem that you ran into. This is where you went over the cliff. So you have to say then, when Stephen was dying and looked up and saw God on his throne, he was lying. And when Daniel said he saw the Ancient of Days upon his throne, he was also lying. Is that what you're claiming? I want you to answer that. Are
Again,
they liars? Are they not real men of the Lord when they claim that they saw the Ancient of Days, right? The Father sat upon his throne. I'm telling you, they did see him, but they did not see his face.
again, I'm
So
not
I'm asking
saying
you.
that. Again, I'm not saying that. That's what Jesus is saying. Because he said no one has seen God at any time except for
Okay,
the Son.
so I'm going to ask you again. So when Daniel says that he's seen God sat upon his throne, is he lying?
He's probably talking about Yahuwah. Yeah, I believe that.
Oh,
Like
so he's talking about the devil, right?
yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, man. It's just a really wayward mindset you're coming with here, man. Because it seems like any verse we go to talk about, well, look, God's here, God there. You can just say, oh, well, that's the devil. But then in this one instance over there, that's the real God. Well, hold up a second. Make up your mind. Is there any instance of the real God in the Old Testament, or is all of that Satan? Or is there like a mixture of the two there? Well, what are you saying?
I'd say most of it's probably Yahuwah, which is Satan.
Okay, well, how do you interpret where in Job 2 where God and Satan are having a conversation?
Yeah,
Wouldn't you
again,
agree that's a distinction between them?
I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a complete like like I don't know the complete answer on that. I think it's possible that Satan um when I say Yahuwah is Satan, I just mean like he's the evil one. And then there might be a servant Satan that's kind of like goes around and does whatever Yahuwah wants him to do.
Okay, but like the part where I'm confused with all this though is why is this a wicked one? Which by the way, you'd say that the Israelites are not God's chosen people; those are Satan's chosen people, correct? When he delivered them out of Egypt.
Yeah, they're Yahuwah.
Okay,
I mean, think
so
about all the people they plundered and killed off. I
but
mean,
but
that's
real quick,
basically
but Jason, hear this out. Is it true or false that Israel is Christ's chosen people as well?
Mm, JC, Jesus Christ, yeah, because I don't like personally, I believe that Jesus Barabbas wasn't born. He just came straight down from heaven. Then there's Jesus Christ, who apparently descended from the line of Jacob.
Well, why don't we see like the birth of this Barabbas Jesus? Why is the
Didn't
other Jesus
you
like
know
described with his birth?
he says something about you people who were born of woman, where I don't have the exact verse on hand. I'd have to look it up, but um let me try to find the verse.
All right,
Um
that's fine. Well, while you're doing that, I
okay,
want to read pretty.
Matthew 11,
Okay.
11. Truly I tell you, among those born of woman, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is in the least of the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Okay. So he's pointing out those born of woman as in um like if he's saying among those born of woman there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist, but yet if Jesus was born of woman, wouldn't he be greater than John the
Well,
Baptist?
I'd say he's obviously excluding himself from that example. He's obviously excluding himself from that.
Well,
But like say for instance, like are you familiar when John the Baptist baptized Christ, like was that Matthew the third chapter? John the Baptist, he didn't want to baptize Christ. He said, I'm not even worthy to undo the lashes of your shoes. Right. So John the Baptist, he felt that he was not even worthy to baptize Christ. Right. So all I'm saying is I think your example is not really a good example. Christ is not including himself in that. He's not putting himself under John the Baptist. He's excluded from the example he's giving, obviously.
Well, I kind of I mean, he doesn't necessarily say that.
Like, say, for instance, when the Bible says that all would have to bow before Christ, does that exclude Christ, even though it says all would have to bow?
Um, sure.
I mean, like, would you agree when it says that all would have to bow before Christ in the end? You would agree that doesn't include Christ, even though it says all would have to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So when he talks about John the Baptist, he's excluding himself from that. I mean, we can agree to disagree, but I think it's very clear to say that. Now, from your view, if you disagree, so are you saying that Christ put himself beneath John the Baptist then?
No, because he's talking about those that were born of woman, whereas I
Well,
don't
then
believe
wasn't Christ born of a woman?
Jesus Christ
Like,
was,
like
but
didn't
not
his mother
Jesus
give birth to
Barabbas.
him in a horse stable because there were no rooms in the inn? So wasn't Christ born of a woman?
Again, I believe Jesus Christ was, but not Jesus Barabbas.
Okay.
So think about this for a second. When Jacob uh stole Esau's birthright or whatever, first of all, he um Esau was tired. I'll just go straight to, in Genesis 27, it said that like Jacob told Isaac that he was Esau. Would you agree that Jacob lied in that instance?
Yes.
Okay. I actually really appreciate your honesty there, because I've talked to multiple people on this and they've defended the action saying that no, he never lied. And I'm like, he did.
Well, yeah,
Now,
didn't he put like a vesture on him to make himself hairy so his father
yes.
thought that he was Esau?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, my point is that's really interesting how that ended up being the action that like Jacob's deceiving ways are, but like yet like those are the people, like that's how Jacob became like Yahuwah's chosen people, was when Jacob had to basically lie to his father in order to steal the blessing.
Well, you know that the Bible says that God has already chosen to love Jacob and hate Esau before they were even born, right? If you read what is that, Romans chapter 9, verse 11 on down, are you familiar with that?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of an interesting point. Why? So, what would be your explanation? Like, why would Jacob, like, if that's God's chosen people, why would, why do you think Jacob had to lie in order to get the blessing?
Well, actually, his father was going to give both of them a blessing, right? Like Esau afterwards, he still got a blessing from his father, but the one who got there first got the greater blessing over the other. So they both got a blessing by their father, but Jacob ended up getting the better blessing over Esau. So they both
Yeah.
still got something at the end of the day, right? Now, just for the audience, I want to read this real quick because I quoted it. This is the book of Romans, which I believe Jason doesn't accept Romans because it was written by Paul. But for the audience, I'll quote it. This is Romans 9:11 on down. It says, "For the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. It was said unto the elder, unto her the elder shall serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I have hated." Right. So before the children were even born, before they did anything good or bad, God has already decided this. And in the Old Testament example of God deciding something before someone's born, I'd give you what was that, Jeremiah? I want to say that's 1:5, if I'm not mistaken, or 5:1. It talks about how God told Jeremiah that I knew you before you were even formed in the belly, and I preordained you to be a prophet unto the nations. So before Jeremiah was even born, before he even came out of the belly, God already knew him and ordained him to be a prophet unto the nations, just as an Old Testament example that correlates with this Esau and Jacob example of God already deciding this before one's birth, like yours.
Yeah. So my question is, if God decided, or Yahweh decided that Jacob was going to be the chosen one, why did he have to use, why did he have to use, why did, why did Jacob have to lie? Because we know that, do you agree that lying is transgression?
Yeah, I'd agree that lying is a sin.
Do you,
Now,
do you,
is what he did right? No, I'm not going to sit there and say that it was right. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, when you read the story, wasn't it his mother that like coaxed him
yes,
into lying?
Rebecca,
So it
yes.
wasn't totally his fault. His mother, like coaxed him into doing it, right?
Yeah, I don't deny that. Yeah. Well, I mean, I do believe that he was still in the wrong because, I mean, lying is wrong. Even if your parents tell you to do something that's wrong, I mean, if you do it, you are responsible. And actually, it's funny because I think about myself, I've done things just because my mom told me to. And um looking back on my life, it's like my mom has told me to do some bad things and I just did what she told me to do. And now my point is, I'm still responsible for what I did just because my mom, told me to do it. So I don't totally like blame Jacob, but I do see that something, it seems weird though that you know w- this is the guy that the line came through, and he, in order to for Jacob to get the blessing, he had to lie in order to get it. I mean, it's just kind of an interesting take, but I do appreciate your honesty on this because I've asked some other people about this and they basically said that Jacob didn't lie. And I'm like, that's kind of insane.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'd say he did lie or was coaxed into doing it by his mother. Yeah, but I'd still argue it was the God's will from the beginning, as we read in was that Romans 9:13, right where 11 on down talks about before the children were even born, that before they haven't done good or evil, God already decided according to election. So I'd argue it was God's plan all along. You know what I'm saying? But I guess we could agree to disagree. You got any other, talking points about the topic of discussion you wanted to come up here about the Old Testament God being, the fake God and the evil God? You got any other talking points we haven't touched on?
Well, I guess so. Jesus said in John 10:37, "Do not believe me unless I do the works of my Father."
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
So my question is, if the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, is Jesus's father, then why didn't, like, you do have to think it's interesting that he didn't kill anyone the way Yahweh was killing people, you know?
Well,
Eh,
hold up a second. Well, you would agree that Christ was a man, so he had to be subject to the laws and regulations in the country or lands that he lived in, correct? So he couldn't, even if he wanted to, he couldn't go around and, kill people for this violation or that violation. Hell, he'd be put in the jailhouse way quicker than what he was put into with spreading his message, right? Just on a practical note, you would agree with that because Christ was fully man when he was on this earth, right?
Are you saying that the only reason he didn't kill sinners is
No,
because of
no,
the
no, sir.
laws?
That's not the only reason why. No, but I'm just pointing out a practical example of why.
Okay.
Like,
Um,
let me give you another example. Christ told multiple people in the Gospels to turn from their sin, lest the worst thing come upon them. Like that man in John, the fifth chapter, in John chapter 5, verse 14, he tells the man that he healed. He told him, turn from sin, lest the worst thing come upon you. Or the popular example with the woman in adultery in John the eighth chapter. Christ told her to stop sinning, right? Go and sin no more. So guess what?
Yeah.
If she gets caught up in the same act again, do you think Christ is going to tell them to just forgive her and walk away? No, he told her to go and don't sin anymore. So he was giving them a warning, turn from
But
the sin. If you don't turn from it, eventually you're going to be punished for it.
well, the thing is, he's saying, repent. But the funny thing is, by the law of the Old Testament, she should have been stoned. But but Jesus, again, I think that's another example that proves that Jesus didn't follow the law of the
Well,
Old
I
Testament.
want to hold up a second. I want to hold you on that because I don't agree with you. Christ has given this person an example of mercy, and we see the God of the Old Testament do this too. I'll give you an example. King David slept with another man's wife. Should be punished by death according to the law, but God spared his life and took his child's life. So that's an exception to God's law, right? So
So,
we see, wait, let me finish real quick so you understand what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is these are examples in the New Testament of Christ showing somebody compassion and mercy. That doesn't mean he's okay with their lifestyle. He's telling these people to go and stop doing it. Just like in the Old Testament, if somebody went and say robbed somebody, or let's say maybe did something to their neighbor, right, or stole their cattle or something, they would have to sacrifice some type of animal with the priest in forgiveness for that sin. Otherwise, there would be a punishment brought out, right? So today, under Christ, we have to believe on Christ and then turn from our unrighteousness. We don't have to sacrifice animals today anymore, but we have to stop living our wicked lifestyles and follow what Christ said in order to be forgiven of our transgressions. Like I'll quote one verse for you, which you don't accept because it's Paul's writings, but for the audience, was that Hebrews chapter 10, verse 26. If we continue to willfully sin after we believe, there remains no more sacrifice for our sins. Like yours.
yeah, so the point you brought up about God having mercy on David by instead of killing David, killing off the baby. I mean, the thing is, Jesus never had to like kill anyone to show his mercy of any kind. Um, and
But I mean, I've
that's
shown where the Bible says when Christ comes back, he is going to kill sinners, though.
um,
Now, I agree he didn't kill people on earth when he was walking, but I'd say there was a reason for that. But the point of the matter is, Christ is going to be getting busy when he makes his second return to this earth. And I think that part's being ignored.
well, again, I mean, I would look at the Jesus that lived on this earth and think like that's I mean, because actions speak louder than words, and so if he's not going around killing anyone, I mean, that's who he truly is. He is a person of mercy and love and compassion. And he gave life. He raised people from the dead. He healed people, which is a lot different than what we find of the God in the Old Testament. And
Well, let's take it full circle, though. How do you address, like I brought up at the beginning of our discussion in Matthew, the 25th chapter, verse 31 on down, Christ separates groups of believers. At one group, he sends into damnation and punishment. So, how do you acknowledge that then?
like okay. Um Again, there's a Jesus Christ figure and there's a Jesus Barabbas figure. That could have been Jesus Barabbas. But the other thing is like that's I don't I'm not gonna lie, I don't totally have an answer on like the day of judgment because I do believe there is gonna be an end to everything at some point. What I don't know how it's all gonna go. Okay. I know you share the same belief as me that there's not like, people aren't gonna be, the transgressors aren't gonna be suffering in hell for as in, like the traditional view of hell where you're just suffering for an eternity. I
Right.
believe and I do believe it, it's funny enough, we both believe in reincarnation. Or at least I think anyways. So if someone didn't figure this out, like didn't accept Jesus Barabbas, didn't love their neighbor as themselves, they would be reincarnated and sent back to this earth, which is the place prepared for the devil and his angels. But that being said, I don't have all the answers on the Judgment Day thing. So
Okay, well, let me give you another example. Now, Matthew 24, the apostles asked Christ, now what would be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? So Christ gave them, an answer, told them things to look out for. But I want to ask you about verse 30 here. Well, actually, let's go to verse 29 as well. It says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, will the sun be darkened, the moon will not give her light, the stars shall fall from the heavens, and the towers of the heavens will be shaken. And then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn and weep when they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and with great glory. And then I'll even read the next one. It says, and he shall send his angel for a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. But the point is, where in verse 30, when the people of the earth see Christ appear and return, it says they weep and mourn when they saw him return. Right? They
yeah,
wailed because of him. So, like, why are they wailing when they see Christ if there's like no destruction or punishment going on when Christ returns to this earth a second time?
um, like I don't have. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not sure on this particular
But
point,
with
but I
saying that
think
though, like wouldn't you say the answer would be clear that they're going to be punishment and people are going to be killed on the day of the Lord? Like I don't see why that's not a rational answer.
the day of the Lord, yeah, but again, I believe the day of the Lord is Yahuwah's day.
Okay,
Now I
but
don't
let
know
me
if
let
this
me
is.
understand this because now I'm confused. So what we read about here in Matthew 24 about the signs of Christ coming and his return, so that's not the day of the Lord. They're like two
I
separate
I I
events.
I I'm not gonna lie, I'm not totally sure on that. I do believe that there probably is a separate. There's the Lord's day, as in Yahuwah's day, and then there's also um the Father in
But
heavens.
what would you say is about them that seems separate though? Because when I read about it, they seem like the same day. So like, could you give one or two examples of what happens that you would say is separate?
Well, we know the day of the Lord or the day of Yahuwah includes like infants being torn apart.
I
It
mean, well, I
says
would
in.
argue that's going to happen when Christ comes back too. But the problem is you don't want to accept those verses. Like I'll give you an example. Like, did you know that was that Revelation the 15th chapter? It talks about the blood from the cities being up to the horse's bridle, but you don't accept that chapter.
Well, I think
But
it
that's in
could
there.
be true that that will happen, but that would be Yahuwah's judgment. Or not, sorry, that would be Yahuwah doing those things.
But isn't Christ coming back to do the will of his Father, which in that day will be to bring damnation upon the nations that disobeyed his law and punished his people?
I'm not gonna lie, like I don't have all the answers on this, but the thing is, in the book of Revelation, it says like people were singing the song of Moses or whatever, like the people, the saints and
Yeah.
whatnot. Well, what's interesting is the Song of Moses is like a praise for the people. Like it talks about how they're praising Yahuwah because Yahuwah destroyed their enemies. But the thing is, Jesus said to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So I don't think you would ever be like joyful that people are getting killed off, even if it's your enemies. If you're following Jesus' words to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
Okay. How about just for an example, because you brought that up? What is your thoughts about Luke chapter 19, verse 27? This is red letter. It says, but those mine enemies, which would not have that I reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. That's red letter. Let me read that again because that's such a monumental point there. Christ said, but those who are my enemies, which would not have me rule over them, bring hither and slay them at my feet. Slay them before me, it says. So, like, what do you think of that?
Yeah, obviously, I would say this is probably Jesus Christ that's talking.
Jesus Christ, you're saying. So that's the real Christ?
No, that's the that's that's the the what's the bad
The Barabbas, you
Jesus.
said, or something?
No, Barabbas is the good Jesus. Christ is the bad Jesus. I'd have to read the full like thing in context. So I mean, yeah.
So I mean, so you're saying like that doesn't line up with what Christ said in Matthew 24 that he would have to return, the nations would weep at his return, and then the people that don't want him to rule over them bring hither and slay him at his feet. Like you're saying that that's two different Christs there, then.
Like I would say that they're both probably Jesus Christ,
Well,
the one that wants
but
to
you're
kill
saying they're
people.
they're both the different people, then, right?
Well, like like I
Like the
said,
problem here, man, is from your notion. I don't even know how you can say you trust the Bible because if this red letter is not the real words of Christ, but it's actually the other fake Christ, well, how do we know what to believe then? Because I thought
yeah,
we're
that's
supposed to be
why.
able to trust the red letter.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it is confusing, but that's why you have to read and study.
But I'm
And
saying I have done those things. By your admission, you studied the New Testament one time. I'm saying I've read the New Testament a dozen plus times. That doesn't mean I'm right on everything I'm saying, but I think that my argument on this subject is clearly superior to what you're bringing based on all these different examples. Like, man, how are you going to tell me you studied it one time and have all this breakdown about, oh, two Christ in here, two Christ in here? You know what I'm saying? And by the way,
well,
you're like the only guy who said this. You know what I'm saying? Oh, and
um,
by the way, Jason, I forgot to mention, I had to ask this. I remember like what 7, 8 months ago,
yeah.
some guy was telling me about the rapture. Was that you, or am I mistaken for someone else? Because I get a lot of people who message me on Gmail. Were you the one who believed in that Joshua rapture, or am I thinking of somebody
No,
else?
that is not me.
Okay,
I know I remember there was a guy that was saying that came on your channel, but that was not me. I have come on your channel before, but but no, that wasn't me.
okay, fair enough.
But it is funny though that there are all these people that keep bringing up these rapture dates. Even this one guy, he said for sure everything was going to go down on May 24th, and then he pushed it back. He's still pushing it back. He literally pushed it. He's like, "Oh, well, I didn't account for this 7-day thing. So it's going to have happen on like June 1st, and then after that it didn't happen, so then it was June 7th, and then he said June 23rd, and then he said either July 1st or 2nd, and then I don't know what he's saying now, but
You know
he
what?
kept saying every single time, he said there will be no more dates after this one. But
Yeah,
anyways.
that's hilarious. Like I'll give you an example. Like the guy I brought on my channel, what's this guy, Mark from New Light Studios. I look at what the dude's doing. Like literally now, oh well, now it's the rapture could happen on the World Cup. World Cup. Now we're all looking for the World Cup. It's like really, like you put 100 different dates out since we talked 9 months ago. Like really, you're not going to give the jig up by now, man. It's like come on, man. This is dumb.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't know how they are coming up with these dates, but anyways. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate your show, and I because I mean I like to watch you. I honestly find some of your content entertaining. I agree with a lot of what you say, by the way. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's cool, Jason. I mean, as I said, I'm always open to these, discussions with people of different, faiths or views. I find it interesting and it's also educational for people who listen in. So yeah, even though we definitely disagree, you're not going to see eye to eye on it. I do appreciate you coming up for the conversation, my friend.
yes. Yeah, and thanks again for having me. So
Yeah, no worries. You have a good night.
yes, you too, brother. It's morning here, but
Okay. Well, have a good day
I'm
then.
in. All right, you too. All right, see you, bro.
All right. All right, cool, cool. So let me see here. Yeah, Jason reached out to me. He wanted to have a discussion again, even though we disagree. I'll give him credit that he actually came up for a discussion because most people that talk trash in the comments or you disagree, don't really have the spine to come up and talk about what they disagree about. You know what I'm saying? So credit to him for showing up, even though we definitely disagree. Real quick, I saw that Judah wanted to come up here earlier. I'm not sure if he had to do like a bathroom break or something. But Judah, if you're listening, just let me know in the comments and I will drop a link for you to come up. I do not have very long. Bear with me a second.